Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Darshan Talks. We've had a very special guest with us twice before, and we have him once more. Really excited to have Dale Cook. Dale is the go-to person around the issue of promotional compliance. We agree very often. We disagree every so often, but I always respect what he comes up with. So I'm really excited to have him. We've spoken previously about off-label promotional compliance and enforcement, and how, to quote Mark Twain, phrase it for me, Dale.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
The news of off-label's demise has been greatly exaggerated.
Thank you. And but the question, and it may have been greatly exaggerated, but the question then becomes, why do people believe it in the first place? So Dale, talk to us a little bit about the history of why people believe that off-label promotion is going to be around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many developments, and it goes back, Darshan, and by the way, thank you again for having me back. Really appreciate it. We always have such fun discussions. Your audience must be laughing at how much fun we're having on these things. So, I mean, it all goes back to that core notion that at its heart, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was written before a radical shift in the First Amendment understanding that happened in the late 60s and early 70s as the Supreme Court expanded greatly protections for commercial speech under the First Amendment. And so there's a tension between the way the law was written prior to that shift and then enforcement after the law has changed. And FDA has been struggling with it, quite frankly, and they've been struggling with it some places, quite publicly. And in some cases, with regard to some of these issues as they go before the court, you can sort of see the courts are sort of like, you really can't be meaning what you're saying to me. Do you really mean this, FDA? And the FDA is sort of like, well, yeah, actually, that is what we mean. And that's an awkward position to be in. But as we've talked about in other episodes, at its heart, the prohibition on off-label promotion really is essential to the existing NDA structure that we have for how drugs are brought to market. So some of these cases, Coronia and Amarin are the two that everybody brings up immediately. And then some of the developments in FDA enforcement and guidance around reprints and the Washington Legal Foundation's challenges have absolutely led some people to believe that Mark Twain is dead, right? To believe that off-label, and by the way, just to be clear, Mark Twain is now dead. His demise is no longer, overstated. It's actual. But, there are these headlines that come out. I think it was after the Coronia decision, but correct me if it was actually after Amarin, that one of the leading marketing publications in the industry ran this headline that essentially was like, court says off-label promotion is good to go.
I don't remember when it was, but yeah, I remember seeing that, and a lot of people were confused, shall we say. Both of us were at that point.
And then I had to, call up all my clients and explain to them that no, this is actually not what happened. And the Amarin case in particular is really challenging. And by the way, that there's just in a few weeks, we're going to have this major development. Perhaps the grand irony of the Amarin case is that it could turn out to be even more revolutionary and important than we thought it was at the time, and we all thought it was amazing at the time, and just in a few weeks we might be hearing more on that. But Amarin brings this product to market, which at its core is not substantially different from a nutritional supplement that you could go down to GNC and purchase, right? It's fish oil. Now, it is manufactured as a drug, manufactured to much, much higher standards of purity, et cetera, much more rigorously developed than the stuff you buy as a nutritional supplement. But at its essence, the substance itself is not significantly different from that nutritional supplement. And so they do the work to demonstrate to the FDA that it qualifies as a drug, that it is safe and effective for the specific use that they want to bring the product to the market. They bring it to market, and then they go for an additional use. And they talk to the FDA about that additional indication, and they say, hey, here's what we want to do. Here's the additional indication we want to get. Here's how we're going to set up our clinical trials to demonstrate that it's safe and effective for this additional indication. Do you all think this is right? And FDA signs off on it and enters into what's called SPA, Special Protocol Assessment, with the company, and says, yep, we're good to go, right? Company goes out, does clinical trials, everything comes out the way the company expects them to. Everything's good. Amarin goes back to the FDA and says, all right, great, we demonstrated it, give us our new indication. And FDA says, well, it's a funny thing. Since, you initially talked to us about that clinical trial and what you were trying to prove, we're not so sure that actually matters anymore. So we're going to withdraw from the SPA. We're going to withdraw from that agreement that we made, and we're going to hold an outside panel, bring in an advisory committee to talk about this and see what they think and whether we should approve this new indication. Mm-hmm. The outside committee says, yeah, we agree with the FDA. This is really not, we don't think this matters anymore. And so FDA declines the request for an additional indication, right? Issues a complete response letter in response to the SNDA submission from Amarin. Yep. And as part of that, FDA says, and you better not promote this, right? Yeah. And that's the thing that Amarin was like, well, now wait a second. We did the clinical trials. We demonstrated everything that we said we were going to demonstrate. We've got all of this data. Why in the world can we not promote it? And so I saw a person from Amarin talk about this, and they said that they viewed themselves as taking the extremely conservative position of suing the FDA. Everybody in the room, of course, had their jaw drop because they were like, what do you mean suing the FDA is the extremely conservative position? But as opposed to, for example, just going out and, blatantly violating what FDA had told them not to do. So Amarin sues the FDA, says we got to be able to do this. And the judge didn't say, FDA, you're wrong. But the judge basically said, FDA, you're going to lose this case. So you need to settle, right? Because what was FDA's position? This is where FDA's position was. They said, look, we're perfectly okay if they want to package their stuff up as a nutritional supplement, just put the stuff in a different box, and then they could say all of these things about it. And you can see the judge in sort of responding to this being like, come on, really? Like, you're going to say that if they put it in a different box and sell it in a different way, that then they can say something, but putting it in this box, they can't say it, and what they're saying is the truth the whole time? So, that's where the settlement came down, and Amarin has been actively promoting their product, quote, off-label, right? Yeah. Promoting their product for unapproved uses. And shortly, that might all change because they're going for the indication again and some other information as well. But, at the moment, we have a single company that is engaged in off-label promotion. Everybody knows that they're doing it, and everybody is okay. It
really allows them to do it, which I think is fascinating.
Yes, it is explicitly permitted, and they are the one and only company that has a way of getting the FDA to approve their off-label communications, right? Nobody ever gets their communications approved, but Amarin does for its off-label communication, which is just like, So every now and then somebody will be like, so Dale, you're telling me that I can get FDA to approve my off-label communications? Like, no.
You just have to
unless you're hammering.
win in the worst way possible for that to happen.
Right. So it's like this. So if you're in that really unique situation, you've got a substance you could have been brought to the market via a different pathway. Right. You have gotten the clinical trial data, solid clinical trial data, where FDA signed off on the design of the clinical trial in advance, and you absolutely hit all of your endpoints and yada, yada, yada. Okay, well then maybe you've got, a precedent that you can point to, but nobody's ever in that situation, right? That's just...
Well, until about, say, 3 weeks from now, or I'm making up a date, but in the next few months, we may exactly be in that situation. For a long time.
Yeah, and there will be somebody probably who does wind up in that, and then we'll have to figure that out, and especially with some of these newer products, as you and I were talking about offline, where...
By the way, if you as the listener can guess which types of products we're talking about, feel free to mention it. We may or may not answer because it may not be the smartest thing in the world for us to answer, but we'll figure it out at that point. But please continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. If the listeners can figure it out, then we have to commit to going ahead and holding a podcast and actually publicly presenting our positions on it, which, my God, like I just don't know if I'm willing to take a stance on this stuff. I've got a reputation to maintain.
I love taking stances on things that are controversial because I'm okay being wrong.
Okay, well, you're a far braver man than I. So, it was coming out of this development, and Coronia is another case where you had an individual sales rep who was accused of engaging in off-label promotion. And when I say accused of it, we had tape recordings of the conversations. There was no doubt that there was off-label promotion going on. And so coming out of these cases, a lot of people sort of overreacted and sort of had this, anything goes, you can do whatever you want. And FDA has reacted to this stuff by recognizing that there is, in fact, valuable off-label information, that it's not realistic to think that a company's FDA-approved product label is going to be able to keep up with developments in science. That's not realistic. So there's a need and a value in getting this information out there, but it has to be done in a way that maintains the integrity of the overall NDA process. And that's the thing that FDA is trying to balance. And I'm not going to tell you that I think they've got it perfect, but they absolutely are struggling with it, and they're working toward it. And I think they're in a much better place than they were.
Telling us how they're struggling.
I'm sorry, what?
There's only a 63-page memo telling us how they're struggling.
Yeah, well, there's only a 63-page memo telling us we're right. It's just pounding the table, saying we know we're right. We know this is important, and we're gonna protect the public health.
Right. And let's be honest, both of us are very much in favor of protecting the public health. We just think there are better ways to do it and smarter ways to do it. But when we sort of need to get on the same page, is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, with regard to not just protecting the public health, but advising clients, the companies who, nobody calls me up, and I'm not claiming that there are no bad actors in the industry, but nobody calls me up. Nobody calls you up and says, hey, I want to break the law. Help me figure out how to do it. Right?
Except in the case of cannabis. Except in the case of cannabis, because in those cases, it's literally federally illegal. But we'll ignore that piece. That's not the point here.
Yeah, so we're not going to go down that rabbit hole at the moment. But the companies are calling us out because they want to do the right thing, and they have it's not that unreasonable to say in areas with this type of gross uncertainty, if you're going to hold us accountable, if you're going to potentially throw us in jail, then we ought to know what it is we can do and what it is that we can't do, where the lines are. They should be pretty clear, right?
Absolutely. And that actually goes to a Supreme Court decision, which actually says, and it's one of those things that I haven't seen too many people talk about, and this may be a conversation for another time, but in the Fox v. FCC decision, the Supreme Court specifically came out, and I'm sure you're very familiar with it, the Supreme Court specifically came out and said, if you're going to tell someone not to do it, you've got to be clear about what that is. You can't prosecute someone for despite not telling them what not to do. So
absolutely,
it's in the same sort of genre. Anyways, this was amazing as always. Thank you for joining us, Dale.
Thank you, Darshan.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.